Hey everyone, welcome to the channel. I'm Kyle and I'm here to bring you another exercise in intellectual integrity. I often hear this argument against additional gun restrictions from pro-gun people. Look, banning or restricting guns just won't work. It won't deter people from getting them, let alone criminals. It'll just create an underground market, people will get them anyways, except now we can't apply all the laws we agree with, like background checks. Things loaded. Marco Rubio seems to have made a claim along these lines in response to a renewed call for gun control in response to the Parkland shooting in Florida. Since nobody really believes that bans will completely eliminate the targeted behavior, I'll take this to mean that bans and restrictions won't reduce the rate of gun possession and gun ownership. This is just an assertion at this point, of course. There are arguments for it, and we'll consider them in just a second. The argument continues as follows. Even if gun ownership and widespread gun possession were bad, it doesn't really matter. Banning guns, restricting guns, it's completely ineffective. So why impose a cost of liberty on gun owners for no discernible offsetting benefit whatsoever? This argument represents an argumentative strategy that cleverly sidesteps the more fundamental question of whether or not gun possession and gun ownership is a bad thing or a good thing. Regardless of whether it's good or bad, banning guns, restricting guns is completely ineffective. So there's really no reason to do it, especially since there are certain costs attached to it. Now, I often hear this argument against additional abortion restrictions. Notice how similar this argument is. Banning or restricting abortion just won't work. It won't deter women from getting them, especially women in dire straits, and it'll just make abortion more dangerous without making it more uncommon, right? NBC News recently published an op-ed making this case, and it's been made many times before. Just like before, the basic idea here is that abortion bans and abortion restrictions just don't work. So regardless of whether abortion is good or bad, there's really no reason to impose a ban or restriction, especially since there's a cost of liberty on women. This is just an assertion, again, but we'll consider a couple of arguments for it in just a moment. The argument continues as follows. Even if abortion were bad or wrong, it doesn't really matter because banning abortion or restricting abortion doesn't lower the rate of abortion. So why impose a cost of liberty on women for no discernible offsetting benefit? Just like the argument against gun restrictions, this argument represents that sort of argumentative strategy that tries to show that banning abortion or restricting abortion is a bad idea, regardless of whether or not it's good or bad, so it cleverly sidesteps that more fundamental question that people often debate. Whether right or wrong, why ban abortion? Why restrict abortion when there's no benefit and when there's also costs attached to it? My aim in lifting up these two arguments is to pose the following key question. Is it consistent to accept one of these arguments without accepting the other? Note that my question here is not whether or not additional gun restrictions or additional abortion restrictions are a good idea or a bad idea. I'm not posing that question today. Nor am I asking whether one can be consistently pro-gun and pro-life or pro-choice and anti-gun. I think you can, and many people are. My question is whether one can consistently accept one of these arguments without also accepting the other. The answer to this question, I think, depends entirely on how one argues for the basic premise of each argument. So let's start with the argument against gun restrictions. One could simply claim that it's a general fact about human psychology that laws don't deter people from getting what they want. If somebody really wants something, they'll find a way to get it, whether it's guns or an abortion. Or, I don't know, something else? Anything? Gum? As a side note, notice that this way of justifying the basic premise of the argument undermines one of the main reasons we put laws in place, which is to deter people from the targeted behavior. But I digress. Because this reasoning depends on a psychological fact about human beings in general, it applies equally to gun restrictions or abortion restrictions, or really any restriction on anything for that matter. If someone really wants a gun, they'll find a way to get it. If a woman really wants an abortion, she'll find a way to get it. And I guess if somebody wants gum, they'll find a way to get it. The stated premise entails both claims, and you simply can't consistently accept one but reject the other. In order to avoid this inconsistency, you'd have to argue that people respond differently to gun restrictions than they respond to abortion restrictions. This certainly preserves consistency, but it involves a lot more analysis and research than bumper sticker philosophy and memetics can allow. One would have to show that people are deterred from buying guns by gun restrictions, but not deterred from getting abortions by abortion restrictions, or vice versa. And I admit, it could turn out that human psychology is quirky like this, that it works this way. But for my part, I'm pretty skeptical that this is the case. Studies that attempt to show that abortion restrictions or gun restrictions don't work tend to compare apples to oranges, and in general, isolating and screening off all the potentially confounding factors is maddeningly difficult. Most fundamentally, though, it seems to me wildly implausible that legal restrictions don't reduce the targeted behavior, let alone that they increase it, as some argue with the case of abortion restrictions. And it's even harder for me to believe that gun restrictions work, but abortion restrictions don't, or vice versa. But that's the price of consistently accepting one of these arguments and rejecting the other. If that price seems too high, it's intellectually incumbent upon us to accept both or reject both. Personally, I think both of these arguments fail, and fail together. So I think the debate should focus on whether or not legal restrictions for abortion or guns are a good idea in the first place. Well, that's all I have for you today. If you have any thoughts on the relationship between these two types of restrictions, feel free to share them in the comments below. Just be sure to keep it respectful. If you're interested in more exercises in intellectual integrity, consider subscribing to my channel. Just be sure to hit that little bell icon so you're notified when I post a new video. Remember, all I'm asking for is a little consistency. Please.